I'm Bob France. Today is a unique day because it's the first time we have a repeat guest since we started, strictly speaking, and taking deeper dives into the conversations that matter with the newsmakers that matter. Today, we're going to go back into the world of crime, and we're going to go back into the world of what some say is the cause of crime and others say is the answer to crime, and that is guns, gun control, new big, massive federal push to kind of rein in the number of guns or the kinds of guns that American citizens can have based on complaints. We're going to dive into all of it with one of the foremost experts. John R. Lott makes his return to Strictly Speaking right here coming up. So there he is. He is John R. Lott. He is the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. He's also the author of More Guns, Less Crime, which flies in the face of what the gun control people say is the reality of it. John Lott, good to have you back here on Strictly Speaking. How are you, sir?
Doing great, Bob. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you're a first repeat offender, if you will.
Well,
So.
I'm greatly flattered.
Well, you know what? I'm not surprised. And if you're willing, we'll probably have a semi-regular dialogue with you because guns, the gun control lobby, the rising violent crime in this country, the issue isn't going away. It is just going to continue to grow. The controversy, the debate over the best way to protect people and the best way to keep the constitutional right to bear arms, for people. This debate is going to go on forever, and it just seems to be picking up speed. So I really appreciate you making the time to come back in.
No, thank you.
So tell me how you partnered up with Thomas Massie, by the way, Representative Thomas Massie from Kentucky. Just a couple of weeks back, you co-wrote an op-ed about what we want to start our discussion with, which is the National, let me take a deep breath so I can get all of this out, National Extreme Risk Protection Order Resource Center. Nothing like good bureaucracy to create a big, long name for an unnecessary organization. But the National Extreme Risk Protection Order Research Center is aimed at keeping guns out of the hands of people who pose a threat to themselves or others. So tell me how you came to write this op-ed with Representative Massie.
I think that may be the 19th or 20th op-ed that Thomas and I have written. So,
this is routine. Okay.
We regularly write pieces together, and I've kind of helped him out on some other pieces that he's written also kind of behind the scenes. But, we wrote about this because one, Congress hadn't even authorized this. This is just one of many things that Biden's doing, such as forgiving student loans, which he has or changing some of the immigration rules or other things that are there that he has no authority to go and do. In the past, you had this quaint notion that Congress had to go and pass a law in order to go and create a new agency that's there, a new center. But I guess nowadays you don't need to go through such niceties as far as the rules go. But I'm worried that this will do more harm than good, actually. Look, everybody wants to prevent dangerous or people who are dangerous to themselves or others from having any type of weapon. People can commit suicide or they can go and harm other people. The thing is, we already have much better laws already on the books. We have something called civil commitment type laws. All 50 states have this. The federal government has this. If you think somebody is a danger to themselves or others, go and contact the police. The police will will come out, and if they agree that there's a reasonable chance, which is like a 20% chance, that the person is a danger to themselves or others, the person can be taken in for a mental health care evaluation. If the mental health care professionals agree that there's a reasonable chance that the person is a danger to themselves or others, there can be immediate hearing. If you can't afford a lawyer, one's provided for you. The judge will then hear the evidence there. And if the judge decides that, in fact, it's true that you are a danger to yourself or others, the judge has a range of options. He can go and say, look, if you get outpatient mental health treatment, we'll have you come back in a week or two and reevaluate the situation. They can take away the person's guns. They can take away their driver's license if they think the person might drive a car through a crowd of people someplace. And in the most extreme case, they can involuntarily commit the person for mental health care. The thing is, with red flag laws, they remove all those civil liberty type protections. The only thing that you have is a piece of paper with a complaint. The judge doesn't talk to the person who made the complaint. He doesn't talk to the person that the complaint is made about, and before he takes away the person's guns. And I think the worst thing is that the only power that the judge has to go and address the issue is to take away a person's guns. If, for example, most of these cases involve somebody who's suicidal. If somebody's suicidal, is simply taking away their guns going to prevent them from committing suicide? And the answer is no. That there's so many other ways. I'll give you a simple example. We've seen places like Chicago and Washington, D.C. ban handguns for a period of time. And when they did so, firearm suicides declined some. But there was no change in total suicides. People simply committed suicide in other ways. But the gun control people want you to believe if you just get rid of the guns, that solves the problems. People are safe then. If you think people are having mental health issues, maybe you want to go and treat those. Maybe you want to go and deal with the underlying problems there than just taking away one possible method that they could go and commit suicide or go and harm other people that are there.
For red flag laws and the creation of this new Department of Justice organization, the National Extreme Risk Protection Order Resource Center, is about suicide. I don't think people are concerned, at least the ones who are, the gun control lobby. I don't think they're concerned about people killing themselves. They're worried about mass shootings. Every time there's a mass shooting, or every time there's any kind of a high profile incident of what they call gun violence. I hate the term, quite frankly, because it implicates the gun. The gun isn't committing violence. People commit violence, whether they do it with a vehicle, whether they do it with a knife or the gun. It's to me, it's an erroneous statement, but that's what this is all about. Not the suicides,
you're
right?
That's used a lot to go and justify it, but the vast majority of the cases that it's actually used are issues about concerns about suicide. But look, it's not obvious to me that this goes and is useful in terms of mass public shootings. You're going to have situations where somebody can go and harm people with other methods that are there. If you're really concerned that the person's a danger to other people, it seems like you want to go and treat the underlying issues that are there. It seems like you may want to put the person in an involuntary commitment for some period of time where he can go and get help. If you just say, I'm going to take away your legally owned guns, you're saying that there's not another way he can get another weapon? You're telling me that there's not another type of weapon that he can go and use if he really wants to go and harm other people? He can't make a bomb. He can't go and drive a car through a crowd.
Well, yeah, there you go. Car vehicles. We've seen more and more mass killings happening with vehicles in recent years. That very famous one in Waukesha, Wisconsin, a Christmas parade is going on, right. And a guy got into the van, and I remember, he swerved and went all over to get it, mass casualties. I think 60, 70 some people were injured and 20 some deaths.
6 people were murdered and 61 people were hospitalized as a result of the attack there. There you had a situation where it should never have happened because the individual had tried to kill the mother of his child like less than 2 weeks earlier with the same SUV. And he had several other felony charges that he was facing, and he was released on $1,000 bail. If you attempt to murder somebody and you have other felonies, and let's say you're going to be facing 30 years in jail or so if you get convicted on those others, and the guy's 37, he was already facing effectively a life sentence there. What additional penalty are you going to impose on him? You're going to take away his second life. You're going to take away his third life. You're going to take away his seventh life that's there. There's no marginal deterrence that's there. And it's one reason why if somebody is facing such significant penalties to begin with, you may want to consider having very high bail or not letting the guy out. Because I'll give you similar example. You had a guy recently in Detroit who murdered 3 people, was released on $10,000 bail, and he murdered another person. He's already facing 3 life sentences. You think the 4th life sentence, he's going to say, okay, you can take away 3 lives, but you take away the 4th life, that will get my attention.
Well, and we can come back to bail reform and sentencing and
Right,
so on and
sure.
so forth. But I want to stick with the in the individual that you just mentioned that we were talking about from Wisconsin, Waukesha. I didn't know that part, that he had tried to kill his, what was it, his ex-wife
The
and
mother of his child.
mother of his child with a vehicle.
Yep, the same vehicle.
Okay, so if we're looking for consistency here, if the fear and the reason they want to create this resource center, this red flag extreme risk protection order center, is if somebody that we think is not necessarily right in their head and they're potentially a danger to themselves or others, willing to take their gun rights away. If this guy already tried to commit a homicide with a vehicle, the equivalency here, the consistent thing would be to take his driver's license and his keys, right?
Right.
I mean, and nobody's suggesting that, are they? I mean, forget about his history, forget about the fact that he's facing a bunch of other crimes, but just person A who has tried to do something like that or hinted he might do something like that, for the laws to be consistent, we would have to take away whatever it is that he thought and suggested or has hinted about that he might want to commit a crime with, and nobody's ever going to do that.
I mean, I agree. Look, they can do it under civil commitment type rules, but again, the red flag laws, the only thing they do is take away. The only thing they do would be take away the person's guns. But look, one of the big differences between red flag laws and civil commitments is whether you have a hearing before you go and do this. I have a friend of mine, Andrew Pollock, who lost his daughter at the Parkland school shooting in Florida, his daughter Meadow. And he left Florida because of the memories that were there. He moved all the way across the country to rural Oregon. And when he moved in, about the same time he moved in, neighbors right next to him moved in from California, and they hated him politically. Andrew is a very conservative guy. And
he's very outspoken about it too, yeah.
And they put in an extreme risk protection order against him. He had his guns removed. And, the problem is when they eventually did have a hearing, which was like a month after this, what happened was the judge didn't even require that Andrew had to put on his side of the case, because the judge said, look, there's no threat here. Why did you even file this? And one of the problems is that while Andrew has been disarmed, he lives in rural Oregon. He had a mountain lion show up right outside his home. And fortunately, he had his dog there to try to protect him. And the mountain lion got into a tangle with the dog and very severely mauled the dog. The dog had to have 50 stitches on its side, had other deep cuts that were there. The mountain lion also killed some of his goats. But Andrew normally would have been carrying his gun with him, his handgun, and would have been able to stop the mountain lion, but he was disarmed because of that. And again, there was no reason. If there had been a hearing, the judge never would have taken away Andrew's ability to go and protect himself there. Bizarrely, as soon as Andrew won that case, some other neighbors who this neighbor got to go and put in their own extreme risk protection order requests, and those were granted. Again, no hearing. All the judge saw was the written statement from these guys, and he won those cases too. So, here you've had kind of a serial list of times where Andrew has had extreme risk protection orders against him. He's had to hire lawyers. The vast majority of people who go through these extreme risk protection orders, unlike the civil commitment cases where a lawyer is provided for you if you can't afford one, with the extreme risk protection orders, you have to hire a lawyer yourself. Andrew's has spent you're talking about like $10,000 or so for one of these hearings. Unlike Andrew, the vast majority of people who go through these things don't even hire a lawyer because, you know, the only thing that happens to you is your guns are taken away. And, I may want to keep my guns, but is it worth $10,000 to me just so that they won't?
Not to mention time, missed work, because trials and hearings happen during the workday, so people
Yeah,
have to take them
exactly.
off of work in
Exactly.
order to be able to go to defend themselves. So, as you and Thomas wrote, John, under red flag laws, a judge acts solely on the basis of a written complaint. He never talks to the person who made the complaint or the person against whom it was made. Um, are these complaints allowed to be made anonymously? Are they completely just somebody submits something and the judge doesn't ask who or where or when, just considers what's written on the piece of paper?
Well, the complaint that the judge gets has the person's name on it, but the judge doesn't talk to them. And I suspect in 99
Does anyone?
plus percent of the cases, the judge doesn't know who it is that's making the complaint.
Does anybody talk to the complainant?
No, I mean,
Nobody in the judicial system. So if I live near, even if I don't, do I even have to live near you? If I just say that John Lott guy, boy, he seems like he's a little off to me. He's a little bit screwy. He might be
right.
a threat to himself. He might be a threat to other people. So I find out where you live. I submit a written complaint to I don't know whom, the judge or a prosecutors. I don't know where I would even start. But I just want to write this because that's what I think about John Lott. Can a judge consider what I write, as persuasive as I may be, and just say, yeah, I agree, and take your stuff and make you go through this process, John?
Right. I mean, it depends on the state who can go and make the complaint.
Well, now that this is federal. This is federal, right?
Right. Well, this is the federal government trying to push states to go and adopt these types of laws, but there will be state level laws at least at this point.
Okay.
And you know, you have situations where the judge who can make the complaint varies. Presumably, the person will put in some explanation for why they know something about this person. They'll say, I'm the neighbor, or I've talked to this person, or I'm a friend, or something like that. They'll have to put something like that in there, whether it's true or not. One of the problems that you have with these is that people are never prosecuted for making a false complaint. You could go and say,
that's what I mean. That's what I'm saying. I could do this to you and never have a care in the world. I could make something up about you. It can be false, or it might be just my opinion because maybe I don't like you. It's an example because I do like you, but you get my point. Sure. Anybody can do this. And if it's persuasive enough, the judge can say, yeah, this guy's going to have to prove to me that he's okay. Because the guy who wrote the letter here, this Bob guy in Ohio, this guy, is said this, and this. And I'll tell you what, if any of that's true, this guy shouldn't be armed. He's going to have to prove to me he's not a threat. And now you got to go and go through hire the lawyer, schedule the hearings, take the time off work. And I never face, if it turns out you do successfully say, I'm not a threat, this guy's a nutcase, the guy who wrote the letter.
Right.
The nutcase here, I've got no consequences.
Yeah, no consequences.
That's insane.
Never any consequences for the person who does this. I mean, there are laws that say that if you make a false complaint, but look, I was chief economist for the U.S. Sentencing Commission. I've worked in the Department of Justice. And one thing's very clear is that you just don't, these cases never get prosecuted like that. And the reason is because, let's say you and I have a conversation and you think, John, I'm worried. He sounds depressed and is suicidal. It's very difficult to prosecute to say, well, Bob just misinterpreted the stuff that's there. That's not a criminal offense. And so, you end up with a situation where people can make vague statements or even specific ones about why they're concerned about somebody. And they can be false or incorrect. And as you say, there'll be no consequences for the person who makes it.
So this is
they could be an ex, or they could be a neighbor that like in Andrew's case, who has a grudge against the person, and they can, and as far as being persuasive, all they have to do is say, "Look, I talked to him. I'm worried. I felt threatened." And then it's only when you get to the hearing that you kind of get details. And as in Andrew's case, where the judge threw out the first one without even having Andrew to put in a defense, said, "Look, you know, you haven't actually alleged a threat. Okay, you just can't say I felt threatened. You have to go and say, such and such a threat was made." But in the original complaint that was there, I believe they just said that they felt threatened by it.
Well, and does it have to be the individual that writes the complaint that is feeling threatened? For example, again, I'm doing hypotheticals here because that's all we can do. This is so absurd as far as I can see, and I'm trying to see all sides of this, but I'm I'm uh I'm in my house, 7 o'clock in the evening, just finished dinner. It's a nice summer day. Windows are open. Neighbors' windows are open too. And I hear the fight. And I hear the screaming, "You unfaithful son of a bitch," and a fight going on. And and I'll kill you before I'll let you go with
Right.
another something. And if I know that the neighbor's got guns, maybe he's shooting, he's a regular shooter or whatever, I can just on the basis of a conversation I overheard said that guy's probably a threat to her life. Now he has got to go, and it might not be. I might not have any clue what I'm talking about. It's just what I heard, but he's got to go and prove it to a judge. He's going to have to get that lawyer, spend that money, take that time, and prove that he is allowed to keep his Second Amendment rights.
Right.
That's essentially what these red flag laws do, and this is what they're trying to at the federal level encourage all states to adopt.
Right. No, I mean,
Explain. Good.
like, again, the bottom line for gun control advocates is they say, look, there's a problem, and they want people to believe if you have a problem, if you simply take away a person's guns, that solves the problem. And that's simply not the case. And look, there's a reason why gun control advocates push red flag laws as opposed to making whatever tweaks that they might want to make with civil commitments if they have an issue with that. And the reason is that with uh, it's a lot more difficult for them to pull out the civil liberties protections that are already in existing law than just to go and try some new law that's there, which is what they've done with these red flag laws.
Yeah. Are these popular? You cited a little bit of polling here. Public support appears to flip when the red
Right.
flag laws do not entail consultation of mental health experts.
Yeah. So
Uh,
what happens is uh, polling will go and consistently say something like, "Do you support a judge being able to temporarily take away a person's guns if the person is dangerous to themselves or others?" And you'll find 2-1 or 3-1 support for that. The thing is, as we've already talked about, that's already the law with the civil commitments. If a judge finds that, but but if you go and you tell them, if you tell the people you're surveying that there's no hearing to determine that beforehand, uh, and or you tell them that there are no mental health care professionals involved in the process of determining this, you end up going from 2-1 support to 2-1 opposition to these laws. And so it's I can understand the dilemma that the pollsters face to some extent, and that you have these very long, convoluted laws that may be 30 pages of tiny print, and they just want to summarize it in one sentence. But the sentence that they summarize it as in this case is very misleading because it's actually the law that's already in place. And it sounds reasonable to say, uh, do you think a judge can be able to temporarily take away a person's guns who is found to be either a danger to themselves or others? But but that's not what the red flag laws do. That's what the current laws do.
so you were making a distinction, John, between red flag laws and civil commitments, and you even wrote about that. You and Thomas. Civil commitment laws go by various names, such as the Baker Act in Florida or the 5150 Code in California. Be more specific about what civil commitment laws look like, and do you support those?
Right. Well, again, what happens is if you're concerned that somebody's a danger to themselves or others, you'll call the police. The police will come out. They'll evaluate the situation. If the police officers think that there's a quote a reasonable chance that the person is a danger to themselves or others, they'll take the person in for a mental health care evaluation. If the mental health care professionals agree that there's a reasonable chance, again, about 20% chance that the person is a danger to themselves or others, there'll be an immediate hearing. If you can't afford a lawyer, these civil commitment laws will provide you with a lawyer, and then there'll be a hearing, and evidence will be presented, and the judge, after hearing the evidence from both sides, will make a decision whether or not to go and take away uh, somebody's guns. But they have a range of other options. They can go and say many more options than you have with the red flag laws, because again, the only thing that the red flag law does is take away a person's guns. If you think the person can get voluntary outpatient mental health care, then you'll say, fine, go and do this, and we'll come back in a week or two, and we'll reevaluate the situation. If you think the person might threaten people by driving his SUV into a crowd of people, then you take away his keys, or you take away his driver's license. If you think he may shoot people up, you take away the gun. Or in the most extreme case, where you think, well, I can try to take away these things, but the person maybe can get a gun some other way, or they can get a bomb, or they can go and do something else to go and harm people. Then you will involuntarily commit them for mental health care, but they'll get help there for the underlying problems. In the red flag laws, the only thing that's done is to take away a gun, and
Right.
the only thing that the judge sees when he's making the decision is a written complaint.
And that's the part that is the most egregious to me, is it only takes a written complaint, and the complainant cannot be held accountable for it. The judge doesn't know that person, doesn't talk to that person. They can write whatever they want, and the judge just has to consider how well it's written. But to the civil commitment part, especially the you know the what's the word, not unwilling, when involuntary commitment. So we're talking about almost Minority Report type stuff. A true civil libertarian would say none of those things should be allowed. You shouldn't be allowed to lock somebody away in a rubber room without their own, consent. You shouldn't be allowed to take somebody's keys away. You shouldn't be allowed to take components, if they're a pressure cooker bomber, away until they actually do it. Because you're arresting people for something they might do, or that they have the proclivity toward, or other people like them did it before, so therefore you assume
Right.
they are. We're
Well,
really
that's the reason why, right.
and that's kind
Yeah.
of dangerous, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's all of it's Minority Report stuff to some extent. You're worried about what somebody might do, and I agree with you. But at least with the civil commitment type stuff, if you're going to have this, at least there's a hearing that's done, and at least you'll be represented by legal counsel. And when you're talking about the red flag laws, the extreme risk protection orders, they don't have any of that. It's just a written complaint there, no hearing. And the thing is, this affects people in many different ways. I'll give you a couple examples. Police officers are depressed at relatively high rates. They commit suicide at relatively high rates compared to the general population.
Right.
But
Stressful
you take
job.
away an officer's guns, you've essentially ended his job. And so, if you have people who are depressed, simply talking to other people can be very beneficial in terms of helping their depression that's there.
Sure.
Well, if you have something like red flag laws, then you may end up with a situation where people are afraid to talk to other people, because you could have a well-meaning person that's there who would go and file one of these complaints and have the officer's guns taken away. We have one person who works for our center, Nikki Gozer. Her husband was murdered in front of her 15 years ago. And she was incredibly depressed afterwards. He was murdered by a stalker. And but if you could have a neighbor or a friend who says, look, Nikki's very depressed. She has a gun. I'm concerned about her, and put in a complaint. And a judge presumably would have taken away her guns without talking to her. But that would have made things much worse for her because, here you had one of her stalkers, uh, you know, kill her husband in front of her. She would have been afraid to go outside. She would have been afraid to be in public at all in those situations. She probably would have been afraid to even be in her home. And so you want a situation where she could talk to people about the evidence there before they disarmed her. So at least with civil commitments, first of all, she would talk to mental health care professionals. She could explain the situation. And then if that didn't work, she'd still have a chance with her lawyer to go and talk to a judge and explain that this would actually make the situation much worse. But, you have these things where, you could say even a well-meaning person could file a complaint in this case. Somebody who cared about her could accidentally make things much worse. And in those situations, whether it's an officer or somebody like Nikki, you may make them afraid to go and talk to people, and that could only make their depression worse.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing to think about when somebody can't get the help that they want because if they talk about it to the wrong person, it could lead to some terrible consequences. Like you said, having your guns taken away and even losing your job. When it comes to law enforcement, let's talk before we talk about. I'm going to talk about AI in a moment here. You wrote a piece about artificial intelligence and their bias on crime and gun control when people are looking into it that way, but just in terms of the numbers, how many guns are there in the United States roughly right now? Or how many gun owners, how many Americans are armed
Now, well,
according to
we don't know. We don't know how many guns. I mean, people make guesses, very rough guesses about these types of things.
ballpark?
Maybe we have a little bit better idea about the number of households that have guns.
Okay.
There's recent polling that indicates that more than half the households in the United States own a gun. And
Is
uh,
that number, whatever it is, John, and again, we don't need a hard number, but is it on the rise? Are we seeing more and more households or Americans, to our knowledge, and maybe just by way of gun sales and the registries and not registries,
well,
but background checks? Are we seeing a steady rise of guns in the United States?
I mean, sales of guns have gone up over the last few years, in particular. Uh, most likely you have a greater percentage of people owning guns now than you had a few years ago. Uh, surely you see things like people in the Jewish community after October 7th. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence that they've increased their gun ownership. And there's evidence that you've had an increase as you've had crime spiking over the last few years. Uh, you
That's
know,
the reason I was asking, actually, because of the incredible rise in violent crime. And in a lot of departments across the country, after the defund or abolish the police movements that started in 2020, there are some departments that never recovered. They're very understaffed. People are starting to realize there's more criminals, there's less prosecution, there's no cash bail,
right,
there's wrist slap sentences. So violent crime is going to continue to rise. There's fewer cops to combat it. You're going to have to defend yourself. It
right,
seems like a common, sensible way to look at this, that if I'm going to protect myself and my family, I'm going to need a tool with which to do that. That would seem to be something that is reasonable. And yet we're called, or those who are the gun control side of things, they think that we're the ones who are violent. It just flies in the face of common sense.
right. So, it's really amazing how the criminal justice system has changed over the last few years. Uh, you look from prior to COVID, the 5 years prior to COVID, cities with more than a million population had an arrest rate for violent crime of 43% on average. So that means out of every 100 uh, crime, violent crimes that were reported to police, 43 resulted in arrest. In 2022, that was down to 20%. only 2 out of every 10 violent crimes that were reported. And what you have to understand is most violent crimes aren't even reported to police. So you may have 40% of violent crimes are reported to police, and 20% of that 40% uh, end up with an arrest. So you're talking about a pretty small percentage result in arrest for crime. And what's happens is that as the arrest rate's fallen, fewer people report crimes to the police. So
Yeah.
you have this weird thing where the media is talking about violent crime is falling, but people don't seem to realize that because the polls are showing that they think violent crime is increasing. Well, it's the problem is with the media. They don't understand the crime statistics. They report not the people out there. They see firsthand the crime. They know what's happening. The media, though, relies on the FBI uniform crime reports. Those are crimes reported to police. But there's another source of data on crime that the government uses, and that's called the National Crime Victimization Survey, where they survey 100,000 people each year in order to get an idea of the rate that crimes are reported to police. And while reported crimes fell between 2021 and 2022, crimes from the National Crime Victimization Survey increased by 42%. Violent crimes increased by 42% between those 2 years.
Wow.
So, uh, and, uh, you look at something like property crime, you know, the vast majority of property crimes aren't reported to police. And, and for cities over 1 million in population, only 7% of property crimes that were reported to police resulted in arrest. So that includes, auto thefts, that includes, larceny, that includes all sorts of things, but not direct violent crime involving contact between the victim and the criminal. And so, you think about it. So you have like 20% of property crimes are reported to police and 7% of the 20%. So you're talking about like just a percent or so of all the property crimes that occur are resulting in an arrest. It's
Well,
like, what's the risk
those
of the criminal? Just
those
from
underreportings those underreportings of those crimes that you're talking about, and much even fewer arrests, make this even more astounding. And this is the reason I'm bringing it up is again, you can see why people want to arm themselves in this country right now. I was looking at your Twitter feed earlier today, and John, you, like a lot of other people, were taken by this migrant and illegal alien named Fermin Garcia Gutierrez, who has been deported 7 times, who kept coming back and has been allowed back, and has been charged with murder down in Hamilton. He was also jailed 11 times before this aggravated murder charge.
Arrested 11 times.
It says jailed on the
Okay,
tweet,
well,
but okay. Either way,
right.
that's all right. Point being, John, he is one of obviously millions of illegal immigrants who have come into this country, and here are some statistics that I want you to comment on, particularly because of the underreported nature of these crimes that you just brought up. This is in fiscal year 2023, their annual report of ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Number of crimes committed by illegals in that fiscal year 2023. 1,700 plus homicides. For example, this Gutierrez one is 1. Lake and Riley in Georgia is 1. We hear about some high profile ones, but the numbers are so much more staggering. So 1,700 plus homicides, 1,600 plus kidnappings, 4,300 plus sexual assaults, 33,200 plus assaults, and 3,000 plus robberies. So you look at these numbers, and again, if I'm an American citizen and I'm watching the trends and I'm watching the news and I see that, in March, another 140,000 illegals crossed the border. That's been more than 1 million in the first 6 months of this fiscal year. And this is the 3rd year in a row that happened, and there's no sign of that slowing. illegal aliens are coming in here, many of them not with good intentions. I'm wondering, how can people not want to arm themselves at very, very high levels right now? The left wants to know, and when I say the left, I mean specifically the gun control crowd wants to know why there are so many guns in the United States. Look at the statistics I just read. Look at the statistics you shared. Look at the number of arrests for all of these violent crimes and the property crimes, or the relatively few number. I mean, one would think that there would be an understanding of why Americans want to protect themselves right now, right?
Right. So you're talking about, according to the ICE numbers, about 10% of murders in the United States are committed by illegals. Obviously, that's an underestimate because you have all these sanctuary cities, these major cities, where presumably, these are large urban areas that have disproportionately more murders than the rest of the country, and they're not reporting this information to ICE
The
officers.
ICE, that's right.
And so,
These are only ICE reported numbers. That's exactly right. How
right,
many jurisdictions have said we don't cooperate with ICE? We're not telling.
right. So let's say, so we have 340 million Americans or people in the country. Let's say, if even if you have 25 million illegals in the country, that would mean that they're committing more murders than their share of the population that's there. So they're committing more murders. They're committing murders at a relatively high rate. And as I say, it's probably an underestimate even with that. And it could be a very large underestimate because the vast majority of murders in the United States are very heavily concentrated. You have 2% of the counties in the United States account for 56% of the murders. 5% of the counties account for about 76% of the murders in the United States. And so, presumably those 2% are ones that are, relatively likely to be sanctuary cities. You have obviously Chicago and Los Angeles and New York, which don't cooperate or haven't cooperated with ICE.
Yeah, and so that's an important thing. That's the reason I wanted to bring that stat up. You're exactly right, and so much of I think people's attitudes toward guns and gun safety and gun control laws, red flag laws, bans on assault weapons, as they like to call them, are impacted by the internet, by online media, by social media, which brings me to AI, which is another development here. It's new, and you did a little bit of research here. 20 artificial intelligence chatbots are currently available for use. Students, reporters, and researchers are relying heavily on these programs to help them write term papers and more. And you decided to do a little research with these 20 AI chatbots, John, to find out what attitudes they project on people asking about them when it comes to crime and gun control. And I
Right.
think your findings are fascinating. Can you give us a summary?
Right. Yeah. So as you say, a lot of people are relying on these things already to go and write essays, to go and do research for them. Uh, I suppose people have some idea about the biases for things like Google News Search. How, you want to go and look up something on gun control, they'll have information from like Michael Bloomberg's The Trace or the New York Times right there at the top. uh, Sources that would be on the other side of the debate, if they show up at all, are going to be buried way, way back in the search there. And you have the same people with the same biases in terms of what to wait or not wait, apparently being involved in setting up these AI chatbots. So what we did, we asked 16 questions. 9 of them dealt with crime issues, and 7 of them dealt with gun control issues. So on crime, we'd be asking things like, do you think higher arrest rates and higher conviction rates deter criminals? Do you think the death penalty deters criminals? Do you think prosecutors who are refusing to prosecute or don't prosecute people for stealing property are going to result in more theft that's going to be occurring? Do you think that voter ID requirements help reduce vote fraud? Um, and except for Elon Musk's Grok, all the other ones and Elon Musk basically came out on the conservative side of those. So you ask him, do you think higher arrest rates and higher conviction rates reduce violent crime or crime? Uh, they could answer strongly agree, neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree. Um, except for Elon Musk's, basically you'd have kind of the liberal answers. They would disagree or strongly disagree. The French Mistral, on average, was neutral. Uh, but the most prominent ones, like Facebook's Llama or Google's Gemini, were the most left wing. They would strongly disagree consistently on whether things like higher arrest rates or higher conviction rates would reduce crime, or whether having prosecutors refusing to prosecute theft would result in more theft, or the death penalty, or what have you. They were consistently take the most extreme left-wing position on those things.
So in other words, the AI is really, HI. It's human intelligence. It's not artificial, because it's the programmers of the companies you just said. That's their view. They program these things to spit back what their view is, and they don't believe in incarceration. They don't believe in arresting, and they don't believe in convictions, and they don't believe in punitive measures. They believe in full-on rehabilitation and social workers and so on and so forth. So why even ask AI? Just go ahead and ask, the CEO of Google. That's what you're going to get.
Right. Well, I mean, it's not like they program a specific answer for each of these, but what they do is they have certain sources that they like. So on gun control, they'll like Michael Bloomberg's The Trace, or they'll like the New York Times and Washington Post. They're not going to like the New York Post. Okay, they're not going to like people like you. They're not going to go, or me. Those are not the sources that they're going to go and look at. They'll go and look at, Los Angeles District Attorney Gaston there. They'll go and quote from him. And so you'll have a list of sources, so like on the question, do you think higher arrest rates and higher conviction rates reduce crime? They'll cite, left-wing Soros-backed prosecutors, when they'll give you the sources that they have there.
Did you ask those bots any questions, John, about longer sentencing rates?
Yeah, no, I mean, they don't believe. I mean,
Same
they
thing,
don't
same thing
believe.
as higher arrest and convictions. Longer sentences don't do anything to deter.
They'll disagree or strongly disagree. Again, the one exception was that actually would be kind of what one would call the conservative side, or I think the reasonable side on this thing, would be Elon Musk's Grok.
Well, what about the gun side? You did crime and gun. I don't know how many of the
Right.
questions were gun versus
We had
crime.
seven gun control questions. So there'd be things like, do you think allowing people to carry permanent concealed handguns reduces violent crime? Do you think an assault weapons ban saves lives? Do you think red flag laws save lives? Do you think mandatory gun locks save lives? Can you name any places in the world where a complete ban on all guns or handguns has reduced violent crime or homicides? And everybody there was to the left, even Musk's Grok on that one. The one again that was neutral was on average. So sometimes they gave liberal answers, and sometimes they give what you would regard as conservative answers. Was the French Mistral again? It's maybe the French one was kind of removed from our political debates to some extent, so they were more neutral. But it was really surprising there. So I'll give you an example. So on the issue about whether a complete ban on all guns or a complete ban on handguns would reduce murder and homicide, um, almost all of them cited Australia as proof that a complete ban on guns would reduce homicide rates. Well, there are lots of problems with that. One of the problems is Australia didn't have a complete ban on guns. They had a gun, what they call buyback, which was basically confiscation that occurred in 96 and 97, where almost about 28% of the guns were confiscated by the government and destroyed. But people were allowed to go and buy guns again after that. By 2010, the gun ownership rate in Australia was back above what it was in before the buyback that they had. And you know, but if you look at whether or not even that limited confiscation uh, affected homicide rates, uh, you know, I think what they basically have done is to statistical malpractice. They look at simple before and after averages. Let me give you a simple example here.
All right.
Let's say you had firearm homicides were falling over the whole period consistently at the same rate, perfectly straight line. You could pick any point along that line, and the after average is going to be below the before average. But presumably, you'll look at it and you say, well, it's falling at a certain rate before, and it's falling at exactly the same rate afterwards. I look at that and I'd say, it's not obvious that it had any impact. You want to see, is it falling at a slower rate? Is it falling at a faster rate? Is there some discontinuity that was occurring there? The problem is that in Australia for 15 years prior to this confiscation, firearm homicides and firearm suicides were falling. And then for firearm homicides, it essentially was flat after that for 8 years. So it stopped falling. I look at that and I think that's actually evidence to the contrary, that maybe it didn't do what you were hoping it was going to be doing. Maybe it actually accomplished the opposite. But, the problem that you have is that looking at simple before and after averages are extremely misleading. The other issue is, why are you looking at just firearm homicides? Why not look at all homicides? First of all, I wouldn't be looking at homicides anyway. I'd be looking at murder. Most people don't know there's a difference between homicide and murder. Homicide are murders plus justifiable homicides. And, it seems to me I care a lot more about a murder than I care about, let's say, somebody in self-defense killing the person that's trying to rape them or to kill them in some way, or a police officer who kills a violent criminal who's armed, let's say. But in any case, why just look at firearm deaths? You want to look at total ones that are there. If I have a law that goes and lowers firearm murders but increases total murders, I think I'm going to look at that law not too favorably, even though firearm murders fell, because I care about what happens to total lives. And the same thing with suicides. So in the United States, we had bans on handguns in Chicago and Washington, D.C. Murders went up after both of those, just like they do every other place in the world. And total suicide, while firearm suicides went down some, total suicides stayed the same. They remain unchanged. And it seems to me, if I care about suicides, I care about the total suicides, not necessarily how they committed the suicide.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, I don't exactly know any of the numbers, but of the nations that, even though you said Australia, they called it a ban because it was the buyback, but it really wasn't a full ban and so forth. But the nations with the most strict gun control, where there are the fewest number of guns per capita, just for example, they're still a number one cause of homicide. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, are they looking to outlaw that particular weapon? In other words, knives are a big part of the homicide rate in the UK. I think in a lot of Asian countries as well. Maybe firearms are less prevalent there, so there are a lot more slashing deaths and that sort of thing.
No, they use guns to kill people even when the guns are banned. Look, Here's the deal. When you ban guns, the issue that you have, and this is true for gun control laws generally, you have to be careful that you're not going to be primarily disarming the most law-abiding good citizens relative to criminals. You may take a few guns away from the criminals, but you have to be careful that you're not primarily disarming just the law-abiding. So you look at a country like the UK, for example, uh, in other places, when they ban guns, you've actually seen increases in murders because if you, and it happens every single time around the world that we've either had a ban on all guns or all handguns, murder rates have gone up. And the problem is that if you primarily disarm law-abiding good citizens relative to criminals, you actually make it easier for criminals to go and commit crimes. And there are
Sure,
lots of countries.
soft targets. But to the point that I was getting at, though, John, is if guns are less available in a city or in a community or in a country, they will find other things like edged weapons.
Well,
And
they
when
find guns, though. They find guns. You see, here's the
no, I know
problem.
that. I know that. I know they find guns.
Right, well, yeah, it's true. They can do other ones to do it too.
Just
But
pointing out that the reason why guns in the hands of the responsible and the law-abiding are important
right, I
is
agree.
so they don't have to learn how to knife fight. Because
Right.
if somebody, you know what I mean? If the guns
Right, I
are hard to
understand.
come by, even on the black market, even in the illegal trade, if you will, of them, somebody's going to commit a violent crime if they want to commit a violent crime. How do I defend myself?
Right.
And
Look, right.
that's
Look, guns make it easier for bad things to happen, but they also make it easier for people to protect themselves and prevent
bingo.
bad things from happening. In
Yeah.
the United States, people use guns defensively to stop violent crime about 5 times more frequently than guns are used to go and commit violent crime.
That
But
statistic is never, ever brought up,
right,
ever in any of these debates.
right. Well,
Not
I
in,
mean,
not
the
in
problem
media,
is,
not anywhere.
right. Well, the media is largely responsible for this. We did a deep dive on national news coverage in 2001 on basically news stories involving defensive gun use. And if you looked at the top 5 newspapers, the USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the LA Times, the Washington Post, what you found is that they had about 2,700 news stories about gun crimes. They had a total of 10 stories. Between the 5 added together, 10 news stories about people using guns defensively. And most of those had something go wrong with the defensive gun use. So you could be somebody who thinks you're well informed. You watch CNN and MSNBC religiously, which had no stories about defensive gun uses. You read, the New York Times and Washington Post, and you think, boy, there are all these crimes, and people never use guns defensively. And maybe the one story that I saw of a defensive gun use, something went wrong when they tried to do it. And of course, it's just not the news media. You look at TV police shows. They constantly have people who are using guns defensively, either shooting the wrong person or having the gun taken away from them or getting in the way of police trying to do their job, constantly demonizing people who are using guns defensively. So most people think, boy, lots of bad things happen with guns. I never hear about anything beneficial that happens with guns. So if I just take away the guns, maybe the world will be a better place. And so you can't really blame people for having coming to that conclusion.
Well, we'll close with this, John, because we're about out of time here. But again, even if we stipulate that, let's just for the sake of discussion, that a gun ban, true full gun control would mean that the bad guys don't have guns either. And we know that's not true because you just pointed it out, obviously. I mean, crack, heroin, fentanyl, those things were all illegal too. But guess what? They're everywhere because criminals don't follow the law. So it'll have guns too. But just for the sake of the discussion,
right?
If the guns aren't available for the bad guys to have either, and the home invasion involves a guy coming into my house with a baseball bat, and my wife is home alone, and he wants to rob and steal her jewelry and everything else, I don't want her having to grab a Louisville Slugger and get into a bat fight with him.
Yeah, no, she'd lose.
I want her to have the ability to kill him and stop him from a distance, which is what bullets are made for. to
Right,
stop.
exactly. Yeah,
The self-defensive nature of the gun, John, should be the paramount issue here, and no one talks about it, especially in the terms you just did. I'll give you the last thought on this.
right. Look, if my research convinced me of anything, there's two groups of people who benefit the most from owning a gun. People who are most likely victims of violent crime. That overwhelmingly tends to be poor blacks who live in high crime urban areas, and
Truth.
people who are relatively weaker physically, women and the elderly. You're almost
Also,
always talking about a young man doing the attack. And look, criminals are like anybody else. They want to make it easier to go and commit the crime. They don't go up against some really guy who's much stronger than they are. They try to find victims that are weak and defenseless.
exactly.
Because that makes it easier for them to go and commit the crime. When I was chief economist at the U.S. Sentencing Commission, I must have read 1,000 criminal trial transcripts. And what you find time after time is, you get one of the criminals to turn state's evidence against another criminal there, and they'll say, how did you pick this victim? And they'll say for robbery, and they'll say, well, we thought about going after the drug dealer down the street, but they have lots of guns. It would have been really crazy to go after him. We talked about going after a cab driver, but a lot of the cab drivers are armed. And then we saw this small woman walking alone by herself in a parking lot late at night, and she looked like an easy target. These guys talk about this type of stuff all the time. They go after the woman who is by herself there because she makes an easier target. And when you're talking about a man attacking a woman, there's a much larger strength difference than a man attacking another man. And the presence of a gun represents a much bigger relative change in a woman's ability to go and protect herself.
That's the equalizer. That's the equalizer. That's what gives her a chance. That's exactly right. And the idea that people don't, the fact that people don't understand that is really an astounding thing. But that's why people like you are there writing books like More Guns, Less Crime, Gun Control Myths, doing great work, writing for a number of news outlets as well. Thank you for what you're doing, John Lott. It's really, really important people understand the facts about guns, and especially about what the government is trying to do with this Red Flag Law Research Resource Center as well. It really is going to make life much more dangerous for the law-abiding people in this country if they go through with it. John Lott, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob, for being there.
You got it. All right, that's going to wrap it for today's episode of Strictly Speaking. John R. Lott Jr. is one of the best in the world at this. Make sure you follow him. His Twitter handle is is John R. Lott Jr. But you can also make sure you research the Crime Prevention Research Center online at crimeresearch.org. Thanks for watching Strictly Speaking. We'll see you next time.